Have you ever watched a single arrogant moment flip a whole city on its head? That's exactly what happened the Tuesday a rich, impatient man decided an elderly black woman was the softest target in the room, and learned, far too late, whose mother he'd touched. Dorothy Washington's mornings were a ritual of gentle order. She rose with the sun that painted lace shadows across her tidy living room, set water for tea, and passed a thumb across the glass of her favorite photo. Her late husband, Samuel, grinning crookedly, mid-dance. Her son, Victor, in a tux at a charity gala. Her own cap-and-gown portrait from the year she earned her doctorate in education. People always underestimated Dorothy because they wanted to. She made it easy. Soft voice, soft cardigans, soft smile. No one noticed the steel in the spine that had held up classrooms, families, and neighborhoods for 50 years. Lunch today, Mama. Victor's call arrived at 8 a.m. sharp, as faithful as birdsong. I'll be at Rose's with Helen. Don't fuss, Dorothy said, teasing him as she laced her sensible shoes. It's not fussing if I love you, he replied, half playful, half worried. Text me when you're settled. Across town, Richard Hale chewed up the morning with the same energy he chewed up people. He strode out of a glass and marble lobby with a phone pressed to his ear and a string of complaints spilling past his cufflinks. A parking ticket, a late courier, a barista who dared to call him sir, without the right level of fear. He told himself he was efficient, standards-driven. In truth, he was simply used to consequence-free contempt. Rose's diner smelled like butter and black coffee and hope. Construction workers laughed under neon. A pair of nurses split a blueberry pie. Rosa, the owner's daughter, wiped down table 6 twice and tucked a tiny bouquet in a jar, Dorothy's booth. In 3 blocks around this diner, Dorothy was the quiet queen of small rescues. A scholarship essay fixed at midnight, a rent crisis untangled with a phone call, a winter coat donated without a lecture. Nobody knew exactly how she made miracles appear. They only knew you felt braver after sitting with her. Dorothy and Helen slid into table 6 just as the lunch rush thickened. They were talking about Helen's grandson's acceptance letter when the front door slammed and every fork paused. Richard Hale, in an angry suit and an angrier mood, arrived like a thunderclap. Table. Now. Somewhere clean, he barked. Rose's smile went thin. She guided him, politely, to the only open two-top, adjacent to Dorothy's booth. He slapped a leather briefcase onto the neighboring chair and began stabbing his phone with impatient thumbs. Dorothy reached for the sugar. Her elbow grazed the corner of his case, so lightly she barely felt contact. His coffee, balanced precariously on a nest of loose papers, teetered and washed brown through his documents. Richard's eyes found the wave of coffee, then the elderly woman's hand frozen over the sugar, and something small and mean inside him exploded. Are you blind? He shouted, lurching to his feet. You ruined legal documents worth more than your entire life. Conversations died. Phones rose. Dorothy stood slowly, dignified, apologetic. Sir, I'm terribly sorry. Let me help. You people don't help, he snarled, loud enough to make a baby cry in the corner. You people make messes and expect others to clean them up. Sir, Rosa said, arriving with towels and resolve, I need you to lower your voice. Your voice, he mocked, turning his fury on her, ought to thank me for stepping into this grease pit at all. Helen bristled. Young man. Welfare queens, the lot of you, he spat. This is a respectable establishment. Dorothy's shoulders lifted with a breath that steadied the air. I have apologized. I'll pay for the cleaning. But you will not speak to my friend or this business with disrespect. Something about her calm, her refusal to cower, triggered him. He grabbed the wrist that wore a thin gold band, the ring Samuel had slid there 52 years earlier. Dorothy's eyes dropped to his hand, squeezing her skin, then rose again to meet him with a look that wasn't fear. It was pity. Release me, she said simply. He didn't. His other hand flashed. The slap cracked like a starting pistol across tile and chrome. Dorothy's head turned. Napkins fluttered. The wedding ring spun free, clinked, and rolled in a perfect arc until it touched the polished toe of a man in a corner booth, who closed his newspaper and, without hurry, picked up the ring. For one heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room erupted, chairs scraping, voices shouting, cameras recording. Rosa dialed 911 with steady fingers. Helen cupped Dorothy's cheek. eyes wet. Dorothy touched the sting blooming under her skin, then lifted her chin and said, softly, to a man who had no idea what he'd just done, "You have no idea what you've just done." Sirens grew from a rumor to a promise. The man with the polished shoes, who had entered unnoticed and watched everything, dropped a few bills on the table, slipped the ring into his pocket, and stepped into the sunlight to make a call. It was a short call. It marked the end of Richard Hale's sense of safety. Officer Delgado took statements with professional care. Richard lied with the confidence of a man who'd never been caught. Witnesses contradicted him with the clarity that comes from righteous anger. Dorothy declined an ambulance but accepted ice in a towel and wrote one name on the contact line. Victor Washington. "Your son?" the officer asked lightly, noting the embossed, expensive card stock and the vague title, consultant. "My son," Dorothy said, a smile tugging. "He helps people solve problems." By sunset, #StandWithDorothy crawled across screens. By midnight, someone had found Richard's firm bio and a history of sneering posts that aged like milk. He slept in a penthouse under a fleece of denial. Dorothy slept under the steady beat of a clock she'd wound every Sunday for 30 years. Victor Washington did not sleep. He sat in a leather chair in the back of a quiet restaurant that didn't need a sign to be known, surrounded by people who lived by his word. They called him Mr. Washington. They called him boss. In certain neighborhoods, people whispered a different word, the one newspapers love and mothers hate. Victor had earned that word the hard way. He kept it hidden behind impeccable suits and philanthropic foundations. He kept his temper leashed for the one person who could make him proud with a single look. "Somebody put hands on my mother," he said, and the room changed temperature. Guns did not come out. Orders did. "Not the old way," Victor said, voice low. "The right way. My mother raised me on respect, not revenge. We will let the city watch respect win." By dawn, a DA had a flagged file on her desk. A police captain had a memo on her screen. A judge had a calendar cleared for a hearing that wasn't supposed to matter, but suddenly did. Richard Hale had no idea how many people owed Dorothy Washington for a school recommendation, a casseroles and carpool support network, a phone call that saved a job, or how many owed Victor Washington for a quiet donation, a debt forgiven, a problem that vanished without making the news. Dorothy woke to a cheek the color of a dusky plum, brewed tea, and wrote a note to herself on a yellow pad. Walk to Roses. Wear blue cardigan. Return ring. She did not write teach a city a lesson. She didn't need to. The hook that grabbed millions wasn't the slap. It was what happened next. A son with the power to burn a life down, choosing instead to set a system on fire. In the open, with paper and sunlight and law. It was the moment the city realized the softest spoken woman in the room was the cornerstone under everyone's feet. The headline people remembered wasn't the first one. Not elderly woman struck. Not lawyer claims self-defense. The one that gripped hearts came 2 days later. She raised a mafia boss, and he chose the law. It wasn't a confession. It was a dare. Watch how justice looks when a man who could snap fingers and end futures decides to build a case instead. Victor's first visit was not to a back room. It was to his mother's kitchen. He held her hand, turned it gently to inspect the faint fingerprint bruises. He listened more than he spoke. Helen hovered with cinnamon rolls and a scowl sharp enough to slice marble. "Baby," Dorothy said at last, "don't do the old thing." "I won't," he promised, and for once the vow did not taste like restraint. It tasted like pride. His second visit was to Roses. No fanfare, no entourage. The regulars caught their breath. The staff stood a little straighter. Victor moved like weather through the diner's frame, steady and inevitable. He asked Rosa to walk him through the moment again. He watched the security footage. He asked which customers had filmed. He spoke to the man with the polished shoes, Marcus, who returned Dorothy's ring with a small nod that said more than words could hold. By noon, a pair of civil rights attorneys had volunteered to represent Dorothy pro bono. Behind them stood a network of former students, colleagues, parents, pastors, and prosecutors who viewed Dorothy as community royalty and Victor as a man whose shadow could shelter or smother. He chose shelter. "Every step is by the book," he told the attorneys. "Every I dotted so tight it squeaks." Meanwhile, Richard performed the oldest performance in town, the performative apology. He filmed a video with a trembling lip and careful lighting. He posted about misunderstandings, about heightened emotions, about respect, as if the word had ever crossed his mind before. He used the phrase both sides twice. The comments were polite daggers. The shares came with captions no PR firm could cauterize. His firm's partners convened crisis meetings. Numbers don't care who you golf with. Contracts were pulled. Clients paused for review. A managing partner slid a document across a table and tapped the morality clause. Richard's signature looked suddenly like a noose he'd tied himself. Dorothy, for her part, lived a day no one wrote about. She returned to her volunteer tutoring with a bruise and a brighter smile. The children clustered in concern. She framed it as a lesson. When hurt tries to teach you hate, decline the class. She accepted a pillow from Rosa. For your back, Miss Dorothy, and slipped a 20 into the tip jar with a wink. She wrote thank you cards to the officers who treated her with dignity. She called the DA's office and left a message. Please take your time and tell the truth. The DA did more than that. She assigned one of her sharpest assistants, James Navarro, to lead the case, and told him a story about a woman who had once written her a college recommendation out of thin air. She reminded him that doing the right thing wasn't bias. It was alignment with what the system promised to be. Detectives re-interviewed witnesses. They cross-checked angles, synced audio with body cam timelines, and captured Richard's online bravado before he sanitized it. They pulled his firm's HR complaints, quiet ones, settled ones, the kind that whisper a pattern. It was not personal, it was professional. Accountability always is. Victor watched with a predator's patience and a pastor's restraint. At midnight, he sat with Marcus and two other trusted lieutenants in a booth under a flickering bulb and sketched the clean path forward. We will not touch him, he said, meaning it. We will not scare witnesses. We will not threaten. We will not give him a single thing to hide behind. His voice dropped into something colder. But no one leans on a juror, a cop, or a clerk. If anyone even breathes wrong on this case, they answer to me. That order traveled faster than rumor and hit harder than fear. Old habits ducked their heads and behaved. Somewhere around dusk on the third day, Richard discovered what true isolation feels like. His phone rang only with reporters and unknown numbers. His club sent a temporary suspension of privileges. His neighbors stopped riding the elevator with him. In the building's mirrored lobby, he met his own eyes for the first time and didn't like what he saw. Not a man under siege, but a man unmasked. He called a crisis management firm. They recommended community service optics. He scoffed. He called a friendly journalist. They wanted the other side. He called an old judge who owed him a favor. The judge's assistant returned the call with a line that sounded like policy, but felt like a door locking. Richard's last call was to Dorothy. He dialed the number he'd found on a police report and left a masterpiece of manipulation. I'm truly sorry, ma'am. I was raised to respect elders. My mother's ill. I've been stressed. If we could just meet and... Dorothy pressed delete without listening to the end. She brewed tea. She wrote forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting on her pad. She traced the dent the ring had left in her finger and felt not grief but gratitude that it had rolled to a man who respected its weight. The city wasn't ready for what came next, a press conference not from Victor, but from Dorothy. She wore the blue cardigan. She stood at a simple podium outside the community center where she'd taught reading to adults on Tuesdays for 20 years. Helen stood beside her, fierce and smiling. Cameras clustered like bees. Dorothy lifted her chin and spoke in a voice that refused to tremble. I was hurt, she said, but I am not damaged. I was insulted, but I am not small. I accept that apologies may come. I decline to preside over anyone's redemption tour. This matter belongs to the law. And to the lesson we can all learn about respect. The applause was not thunderous. It was reverent. People do not clap loudly in church. On the edge of the crowd, Victor watched his mother, his moral north, turn what could have been a spectacle into a standard. He felt something new uncoil in his ribs, warmer than victory. It was relief. He would not have to betray who he'd become to protect who she had always been. The hook tightened. Viewers across timelines leaned in. They were not just waiting to see a man punished. They were waiting to see whether a man known in whispers as a mafia boss could become the instrument of accountability without ever touching a blade. Justice, when it wakes, is not dramatic. It's procedural, stubborn, and thorough. Papers shuffle. Clerks stamp. Dockets move. But when the right people are watching, And when the wrong person has finally tripped the last wire, justice can move with the speed of conscience. Assistant DA Navarro built a case like a cathedral, slow, careful, load-bearing. He stacked foundation stones, assault, aggravated harassment, bias motivation. He added buttresses, prior statements, HR complaints, digital footprints. He polished windows, witness accounts clear as glass. He did not gild anything. He didn't need to. Detective Captain Ruiz, assigned directly by the commissioner, brought experience like a plumb line. She had no patience for flourishes and less for politics. She called Dorothy ma'am and Richard sir, and meant neither as flattery. Her team confirmed that Richard had lied about the coffee, about the shove, about everything that might soften a blow into a misunderstanding. Richard's new lawyer, retained at a discount because reputation is a currency and his was crashing, filed motions to suppress, to exclude, to delay. Most were denied. The rulings read like a string of sentences that all translated to "we see you." While filings flew, Rose's Diner became a pilgrimage site. Not for outrage, but for reassurance. Nurses on break pressed Dorothy's palm and whispered, "Thank you." Teenagers took photos at table 6 and posted captions about their grandmother's hands. A retired judge ate eggs at the counter and tipped in scholarship vouchers. The diner's bell rang and rang, not with chaos, but with community. Victor visited at odd hours, slipping in when the lunch rush thinned. He never spoke publicly. He didn't need to. His silent presence was a statement. We stand with her, and we're not hiding. The men who once would have matched his silence with threats matched it now with folded hands and eyes on the floor. They knew the new rules. Respect or get out. In a quiet, windowless conference room, a mediator tried to sell a deal. No jail, he suggested. If Mr. Hale issues a sincere apology, donates to anti-bias training. Navarro slid a folder across the table. Sincerity filed itself into evidence when cameras rolled, he said. You're welcome to propose restitution. We'll listen, but the plea will reflect reality. Reality did not flatter Richard. His firm served him termination papers. The bar opened an ethics review. A federal inquiry sniffed around his past cases, curious whether his contempt had contaminated outcomes. Friends stopped answering. A cousin he barely liked sent a text that said, "Praying for you," which felt less like comfort and more like confirmation that things were bad enough to invoke heaven. Alone in his penthouse, Richard poured scotch into a glass he didn't taste. He stared at the city and hated how it kept pulsing without him. He still believed in the old calculus, that money buys narratives, that fear buys silence, that charity buys absolution. But a woman he would have walked past without a nod had short-circuited his math. He thought of calling her again, of performing humility as a strategy. He set the phone down. Even he knew when an act would read like exactly that, an act. Dorothy's cheek faded from plum to lavender to the warm brown she always wore. She hummed while she folded laundry. She wrote lesson plans for adult students who mixed night shifts and nouns. She met with a young woman terrified to testify and told her that bravery doesn't mean not shaking. It means standing while you shake. She was not campaigning. She was simply continuing, and that insistence on normal life, after a public wound, nourished people more than 1,000 speeches. Helen, meanwhile, curated fury into purpose. She organized a teach-in on bias, packed a church hall with folding chairs, and put the police captain on a panel with the DA and a public defender. They argued about process and found agreement on dignity. Someone filmed. Someone posted. Teenagers clipped it into bites that went viral for being soft-spoken and grown. The comments were shocked by what civility could do. Victor sat in the back, hands clasped, posture saying "I'm here" without demanding center stage. When a young man asked whether he believed in the system, he didn't blink. "I believe in my mother," he said. "And she believes in the system enough to hold it accountable. That's good enough for me." The hook deepened into something richer than outrage, investment. Viewers no longer watched to see Richard fall. They watched to see an ordinary neighborhood rise around a woman they came to love like a relative they hadn't met yet. Then, quietly, the hearing date arrived. Papers clicked into place. A courtroom opened. Sunlight fell across polished wood. People who'd never seen the inside of a courthouse before lined up, not for spectacle, but to stand witness. The system had woken. It was time to see if it would stay awake. Court is theater with consequences. Everyone knows their marks. The bailiffs call. the judge's robe, the shuffle of notepads, the coughs, the throat clearing. But that day, something extra sat in the room, a kind of quiet vow. If the truth showed up, the people would hold the door. Judge Ariana Bell presided with a calm that could cut glass. She scanned the gallery and, for half a second, let her gaze rest on Dorothy's blue cardigan. A muscle in her jaw eased. She'd read the file. She'd read the letters, dozens, from people whose lives had been touched by a woman who made things bloom wherever she stood. The charges were read. Richard's name sounded smaller out loud. Navarro's opening was simple, almost gentle. You will hear a lot of noise. I ask you to hold on to three things: what you can see, what you can hear, and what you can feel in your moral bones when an elder is humiliated in public. The defense tried a different music, stress, reputation, a life of service to the community, and the suggestion that we all have bad days. The words skated, they did not land. Witnesses landed. Rosa, spine straight, voice even, recounted the moment with a business owner's precision. Helen, righteous and funny in the way only old friends can be, told the court Dorothy's first reaction had been to apologize. A teenager's shaky video played from 3 angles and stitched into a single truth: the insult, the grab, the slap. When Dorothy took the stand, the room rearranged itself around her dignity. She didn't perform victimhood. She honored the facts. I was embarrassed, she said. I was angry. She smiled. I was also stubborn. Stubbornness has carried me a long way. Why didn't you leave? Navarro asked softly. Because I had a right to be there. Because my friend wasn't finished with her pie. Laughter rippled and turned to tears so quickly people dabbed eyes as they smiled. The defense cross-examined delicately and made the mistake of assuming delicacy could find a crack. Dr. Washington, he said over-politely, would you say your pride kept you seated? My pride in being a human being, she replied. Yes. Then the defense called their client. Under oath, Richard tried to be careful. He tried to thread a needle woven from self-pity and plausible deniability. But the video knitted itself tighter than his words could cut. Navarro asked him what you people meant in his mouth. Richard flailed. Social media posts appeared on a screen. He blanched. He spoke about stress. The jury stared the way people do when they recognize a song they've heard too many times. In the back, Victor watched with the stillness of a statue carved to warn ships from jagged coastal rocks. He did not smile when Richard stumbled. He did not frown when the defense landed a point. He simply existed as context, the reminder that actions echo into places you never imagined. Closing arguments crystallized the choice. The defense begged for empathy for a good man in a bad moment. Navarro asked for empathy for the woman who had been the target of that moment, and for the countless others who never got cameras or courtrooms. Judge Bell instructed the jury. The jury did not take long. Guilty, the foreperson said, and the word dropped like relief into the room. Sentencing would come later. The judge scheduled it with enough time for pre-sentence reports and for cooling heads. But the moral sentence arrived instantly, on faces, in hugs, through the exhale that rolled like a tide against wooden pews. Outside, microphones sprouted like spring weeds. Dorothy declined them all. She went home. She watered African violets. She called a student to ask about a job interview. She drank tea without flinching when the rim touched the tender place on her cheek. Victor walked with her to the curb, where the evening had turned the city gold. You did that, he said. We did that, she answered. The loudest part of me is you choosing restraint. He swallowed, the old pride and the new pride blending into something that felt like peace. The camera crews caught only their backs, framed by light, an image that would, later, outperform every shouted sound bite by a mile. When the gavel falls, it doesn't just end something. It starts things. Letters go out. Programs are funded. Policies are rewritten by people with fresh fire. Every story of harm can either rot or compost into change, and this one, tended by a city that decided to be better, grew. Judge Bell's sentencing memo would become a case study. 18 months incarceration, 2 years supervised release, mandatory community service at organizations serving elders, a substantial restitution fund for victims of bias-motivated assaults, and, pointedly, recommendation for bar review. The language was cool and precise. It carried heat anyway. The bar review panel met in a room that smelled like carpet cleaner and consequence. They asked Richard questions lawyers hate. Not about law, but about character. His answers clanged. Suspension followed. A career built on cleverness could not survive the revelation that its foundation was contempt. Richard reported to a community center one Saturday, not for optics, but for a shift. An elder in a floral blouse handed him a ladle and said, "You don't scoop pity here. You scoop soup." He learned names. He learned to listen. Once, carrying trays, he looked up to find Dorothy in the doorway. She nodded, neither smile nor scowl, an acknowledgement that accountability is a verb. He returned the nod and did not speak. Genuine contrition is quiet. The Washingtons did more than win a case. They planted an institution. Donations, large and small, flowed into a fund Dorothy refused to name after herself until Helen bullied her into it with affection and threats of baked goods-based sabotage. The Washington Center for Dignity and Justice opened in a converted church annex with sunlight at every window. Free legal clinics. Peer counselors. Training for businesses on bias response. A wall of gratitude notes with handwriting slanted and straight, in English, in Spanish, in languages that needed new volunteers to translate. Policy moved too. The DA announced a bias incident protocol that routed cases to a specialized unit. The police academy added a practicum on de-escalation that borrowed from the teach-ins calm. Judges formed a working group to harmonize sentencing recommendations. None of it was flashy. All of it mattered. Victor funded anonymously and publicly. He moved money with the same precision he once moved other things. The city speculated. Gossip columns sharpened their pencils. He ignored them. He sat in the back row of the center's first volunteer orientation, took notes like a rookie, and stuffed hygiene kits beside kids who didn't recognize him and elders who did, and squeezed his forearm in thanks. One night, after a long day of good work, Dorothy found him on her stoop, tie loosened, shoulders soft. "I could have destroyed him," he said without bother or brag. 10 different ways. "I know," she said, and the pride in her voice made him blink. "You built something instead." He laughed, small and real. "Look at me, Mama. A builder." "You always were," she said. "You just switched materials." Meanwhile, Rose's diner added a small frame near table 6, a photo of Dorothy and Helen clinking chipped mugs, a caption handwritten beneath it. "Respect is the house we all eat in." People took selfies there and sent them to mothers, teachers, aunties, the women who had taught them to be good. The diner did not lean into merch. It leaned into meaning and sold out of pie every day for a month. The city didn't become perfect. It became better, and that's how the world turns, click by dignified click. 6 months later, a gentle rain turned sidewalks reflective. Dorothy, umbrella in one hand and a container of mac and cheese in the other, pushed open Rose's door to her usual chorus of welcomes. She and Helen tucked into their booth. The bouquet on the table was purple, Dorothy's favorite, because Rosa paid attention. A young law student hovered, then gathered courage. "Dr. Washington? I'm Maya. Your case, your grace, changed my major. I want to be the kind of lawyer who earns elders' nods." Dorothy patted the seat. "Sit. Tell me your story." Maya talked about immigrant parents, night shifts, community college, doubt. Dorothy listened with that full attention quiet that rearranges people's bones. "You don't owe anyone a perfect," Dorothy said when Maya ran out of breath. "You owe them your honest best and your respect. The rest follows." Across the city, Victor stood in the back of a courtroom for an unrelated hearing. Another elder, another insult, another chance to insist the system live up to its promise. He wore the same stillness. He left behind the same hush. In his pocket, his phone vibrated with a text from Dorothy. Lunch was perfect. Purple flowers today. He smiled, big, unguarded, sun-wide. Richard finished his community service hours and kept coming back anyway. No cameras. No speeches. He stocked shelves and learned jokes from a 92-year-old named Glory, who made him pronounce humility until it sounded like human. He wrote to the bar not to argue for reinstatement, but to confess that he was still learning the difference between reputation and character. No one clapped. That made the progress real. The center's volunteers outgrew the annex. A local developer donated a warehouse. A crew of teenagers painted the words "dignity is a verb" across the entrance in block letters that dared the future to forget. The city didn't, because every Tuesday Dorothy and Helen still claimed table 6, and, by doing nothing special, reminded everyone what special looks like. The story traveled, edited, copied, imitated. Sometimes titles leaned on the mafia boss angle because headlines crave sharp teeth. But the version that stayed truest, the one people sent to their parents and their kids, was the one where a powerful son chose slow justice over fast revenge because a gentle mother had taught him that the loudest strength is self-control. So if you came here for instant karma, maybe this feels slower than you wanted. But watch closely. The slap's echo didn't stop at a sentence. It kept ringing through policies, through programs, through a young woman's decision to become a lawyer, through a city that found a better part of itself and learned how to use it. Respect isn't a speech. It's a habit. Humility isn't weakness. It's wisdom. Resilience isn't hardness. It's flexibility with a purpose. Kindness is not naive. It's strategic because it builds a world worth living in. If you've ever been underestimated, let this be your reminder. You don't have to shout to be heard. If you've ever misused your power, let this be your invitation. Power is heavier when you carry it alone. Share it, and you might just find it gets lighter and more useful. Dorothy finished her tea. Helen finished her pie. The bell over the diner door chimed. Life went on, better than before, because a woman refused to give her dignity away and a son decided to live up to it.